Hey, everybody. Welcome to Art Fight Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Nolan. I'm here with my co-host, Brian Siskin. Last week, some of you might have tuned into the show or tried to tune into the show. We had the only technical wipeout that we've had in more than 100 episodes. We've had little problems here and there, but we've never just had to wipe out a show. I'm happy to say that our guest from last week is a gentleman and a scholar and kind enough to roll with the punches and come be with us here today. In 1999, there was the beginning of a story called From Hell was serialized in 1999, and then it was finally collected together in what I consider to be the greatest graphic novel of all time. That novel was written by Alan Moore. It tells the story of an investigation of the Jack the Ripper murders. And one of the things that made that publication so iconic was the incredibly unique look that it had. And we're really happy to be here with Eddie Campbell today, who was the artist of From Hell. Eddie, thank you so much for being here with us.
Lovely to be here.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you here. You know, actually, the new version of From Hell, and we'll talk about the evolution of this project, was just published at the end of August. It took us a minute to get you on the show. Obviously, we had a wipeout last week. But now, I mean, we're right at the edge of October, and it almost feels like it's a better time to be talking about such a spooky book.
I hadn't thought of it until this minute, but the Whitechapel murders took place between September and November.
So
I've only just thought of that.
Yeah, no, I think there's something to it. I think there's something to this, the timing of this whole thing. There's an invisible hand guiding it, I think. So I was able to get in touch with you through the publisher of the new book, which is called From Hell, the Master Edition. And let's talk a little bit. Yeah, there you go.
Look at the size of that. It's monstrous.
It is monstrous. Yeah, it's a beautiful book. And why don't we talk a little bit about? Let's just start at the beginning and talk a little bit about how you became the artist for the original book, and then we can talk about how it's evolved since then, and got to the point that it's at now.
Well, Alan asked me. Alan and I had worked on a little thing before. I'd illustrated a little thing of his 5 years earlier. Mm-hmm. I'm also Steve Bissett, who was publishing it. At first, I'd stayed in our house when he was visiting England in 1986. Mm-hmm. And Alan Moore and Steve drew Swamp Thing, you'll remember. But he'd resolved that big companies were wicked, and he was going to publish a magazine himself. Mm-hmm. And Alan was to do this as well. There was a movement afoot to enable the little guy, the artist, the author, to publish his own work. It was going to be a great, magnificent movement where we would overthrow the wicked corporations.
I love it.
I wasn't involved at this point. But none of this really worked. Alan had his own publishing label for a while called Mad Love, and he was to publish a glorious masterpiece called Big Numbers. It was to be 12 issues, and only 2 issues would have been published. I think it would have been wonderful if it got there a bit. But it does make you ask whether the fate of the artist is safe in the hands of the artist. Whether he's safe in his own hands.
Right, the inmates running the asylum, right?
I shouldn't be saying that.
I think we can relate.
Later on, when I tried, I had a great success with self-publishing. In fact, I published From Hell when it was brought together in a book for the first time. I published that in 1999, 10 years after we'd started it. And 3 publishers had gone bankrupt in the interim.
Wow.
For various reasons. You could write a book about what the hell went. Not just the whole industry was in a mess. And it would take too long to explain why. It would bore everybody to tears. Although I think I could make it funny, but it would take It would take an hour to explain it.
But you guys were, that during that era in the like late '90s, going into the new millennium. I mean, that was a real kind of revolution going on in British comics. Am I right about that?
Yes, that's true, I suppose. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I feel like there was a lot of great stuff happening during that time.
If you read comics, if you care about that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, we would care about that. That's why I like sought you out to talk about this. So I think there's a lot of great stuff that happened during that era, and a part of it for me too was that when I was a little kid growing up in Detroit, it was like I was growing up during that era when if you were an elementary school kid, you were reading Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and things like that. And I basically was interested in comics like all the way up into like the beginning of X-Men and things like that. But then I got older. I gave up reading comic books and stuff. But by the time the late '90s are coming around and the graphic novel is starting to become a thing, it's around that time that I started, diving back in, and I found things like From Hell, and I found authors like Grant Morrison and people like this. And it just seemed like at that time, a lot of the best stuff that was being done was coming out of Britain.
This is true, yes. I was living in Australia all of this time, of course.
Mm-hmm. Is that real? Okay, you've lived a lot of different places, haven't you?
I have, yeah. I'm in Chicago now. Yeah, I was in Australia for a long time. I was in Australia for 29 years, actually.
Wow.
So all the time I was drawing Victorian London. I was in sunny Brisbane. I was living in.
That is crazy.
In the tropical paradise.
I always envisioned you guys just like in some holed up in somewhere in London, writing that book, because it's that book is so much about the place, and you guys evoke that place so well, especially you with the actual look of the way that you described London to our eyes.
I think it was easier to do by not being there, because modern London wasn't getting in the way.
Good point.
It was easier to reimagine old London from books and paintings, and, old photographs.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I found myself visiting actual London, I could see that it would get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
It was difficult. You had to learn to unsee an awful lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
All the whole
I can see how that would
apparatus of the electrical apparatus of our world would have made it difficult to see what it used to look like.
Yeah, I can imagine that actually being there could actually be more difficult instead of less difficult. Brian's like showing, for people who are actually watching the video of this, Brian's showing a bit of the original From Hell, I think this is. And one thing that people might notice, and Eddie, I swear to God, I'm sure that you've been asked this 10 trillion times, but I gotta ask you this question just because we need to know the answer. Why did you decide to do the whole book in black and white? Because that's one of the things that made it so unique.
Right. Remember to what I was saying a minute ago. We were doing this ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have the resources to publish color. But publishing color was a much more expensive and complicated thing then than it is now.
Right.
Because it's not just twice as complicated or difficult. Remember, there's black ink, but then color means you're adding 3 other inks: red, yellow, and blue. It's 4 times as complicated and as expensive as just doing a black and white thing. Mm-hmm. Theoretically.
Right. Yeah, I understand.
It's not exactly, but and nowadays you can get very inexpensive color printing in China and Korea, which it's changed the whole economic balance of wanting to do a thing in color. But I didn't even consider it an option to do it in color. We were going to be publishing this thing ourselves. Mm-hmm. And remember what I said was that 3 publishers went out of business in those 10 years. Color was just an unnecessary complication. Remember also that during this time that Frank Miller started his own series, Sin City, and he did it in black and white. He made black and white cool.
Yeah, good point. I had never really thought about the connection between those two. Yeah, that's interesting.
It was happening at the same time. I think he started it in 1990.
Yeah, interesting.
I wasn't big enough to make it cool, but Frank Miller doing it made it cool.
Yeah, well, I would say it's definitely cool. I mean, it's one of the things I loved about that book from the beginning. And really one of the things we're always trying to do on this podcast is uncover stuff like this. It never occurred to me that you guys just did it for practical reasons. And it's like, hey, we did it ourselves and we had to do it in black and white. And it's almost like the punk band that's got the terrible equipment that happens to sound great and unique. And all of a sudden it's like the special thing about them is just the practicality.
Yeah, but we were drawing it in the garage.
Also interesting back then, I think it was with the printing process, it was a huge decision to just say, oh, okay, we're just going to do spot color, or it wasn't necessarily just between.
It was a big move when talking about Frank Miller, when he did the Yellow Bastard. Every time the Yellow Bastard appears, he's yellow, and it was the only color in the book. Just on one character, and then he made a feature of that for a while. I think he used a red spot color in the next book, but it was kind of witty that it was called the Yellow Bastard. The only color in it was this guy who was yellow.
I think that goes for just about anything that's sort of, especially any works of art that are just kind of fetishized or adored, irrationally as we do about all these things, that are so beautiful. Led Zeppelin 4, whatever it is, right? And I think that it's always the same thing. It's always like, I think about, I know this is sort of a detour, but I was thinking about like the producer King Tubby out of Jamaica from the 60s and the 70s. He was called King Tubby, which sounds like this kind of really cool sort of regal studio producer name, but he was just called King Tubby because he was really good with tubes, because he was a really good TV repairman. and that's how he got good with electronics. And then that is what led to the sort of invention of his the dub technique. And it was sort of like the things that are the artifacts of whatever you might be lacking at the time, are really what become their aesthetic staple later on. And I find it's often something like what you're talking about, Eddie, where it's like, that's what we had, man. Like you hear that from just about any art form. It's like people try to put a lot of mystery around these things,
I never made a color book. I did color covers here and there when I was publishing my own comics, but I'd never done a whole color book until 2004. Which was after From Hell was finished. And I've been doing color books continuously since then. And I now know how to do it. And it's not as easy as just coloring it in. This actually getting the color that, if you paint color, just getting that color, getting the printed thing to look like the thing that you've painted. Or you've hand separated the color, which is another way of doing. The whole process was just, it was a minefield of difficulties, and you get used to the outcome never looking like the way you planned it. It's just hugely complicated. I've got it now to where I can design a thing and it'll come out the way I want it. 80% of the time.
It sounds like that your sort of movement from black and white to color sort of coincides with perhaps, it sounds like sort of your adoption of technology as part of your practice as things were actually developing to, 2004, 2005 is a funny time, right? That's when that's almost like the time when computers finally started delivering on the promises they were making 20 years prior. You can actually use it for stuff now. And so it became like this thing to adopt. And I think that, what I find really interesting is just that, your adoption of technology, relative to the work,
See, I make my books on the computer now. I do everything on the computer. But because everything in the computer is in color, it's almost intuitive, counteractive to try to do something in black and white on the computer. It's easier to do it in color. It's like 100 times easier to do it in color than nowadays. It's if you want to do something in black and white, like in my own books, my own autobiographical books way back in the day, I always use Zippertone. You know there's those screens of dots that give you a gray. They used to use in the old time comics and illustration,
like rasterization look.
But it's when I came to when I did my big Alec book, the Years Have Pants. When I did that, I had to scan all the artwork, but, and most of the pages, and that's extremely difficult to. When you scan that and you get moire patterns, and you've got to devise complicated techniques for undoing that or for avoiding that. There was one picture that went all the way across the page where I had to replace all the dots, and there was 50 lines of dots per inch.
Oh no!
I had to replace every dot on a sky. Now, I didn't do it dot by dot. Like I'd do a block of 8 dots, and I'd make every dot in that perfect, because when you scan it, the computer will pick up a round dot. It picks up this little pixelated shape, and the next dot is a different pixelated shape, and the next one's different again, and you get this, and then you get the pattern repeating, and this is why you get those moire patterns. So to actually create a series of dots that are all exactly the same, even if they're not perfect circles, but they're all exactly the same, takes an awful lot of thinking, a lot of work. So having my little square of 8 dots, I then move that along to the next square and replace the next square, and then I'd have a big square of 24 by 24, 32, and eventually I could replace all the dots. Right. So to actually repair and reprint via scanning in the computer artwork the way I used to do it, it's a huge pain in the arse. Compared to doing things in color, you don't even run out of paint when you're doing it in the computer. You just go to the color and put your color in. The computer puts the color in. It never runs out. You don't have to go to the shop and.
Do you find it curious? Do you find it curious, Eddie, that there's sort of younger people are coming up now without all these sort of more analog ways of doing things, right? And so they kind of fetishize that stuff, right? And they're really into sort of the ephemeral artifacts and, like the collector-y aspects of all that and the tangible. And I think that it's beautiful. I mean, it's great to do that. But I think that on the other side of it, it's interesting that, you being the person that you would think would be like, okay, this is my tried and true practice for the last 30 years. I've been doing this. Really, you've evolved away from the sort of, for lack of a better term, like fetishization of those ephemeral aspects of your process.
Yeah, definitely. And another lovely thing about color now is that you have millions of colors. If we tried to do color, I remember way back in the 80s, we used to put color covers on our comic books that we were publishing ourselves in the mid 80s, but we had to hand separate the colors. So if you wanted a green, you got to lay down a screen of yellow dots and then over a screen of blue dots and turn them slightly so that they're not going to create an unwanted moire pattern. And you had to do all this by hand. And you didn't have a million colors. You had maybe a dozen. If you were feeling venturous, you might go up to 20, but you were just making more work for yourself. So you didn't want to go there. You didn't want to get too complicated.
Yeah.
But we had to actually separate these colors by hand, and you had to make each color on a black sheet, because the black sheet tells the printing plate. So you can't actually see that it's yellow. You just have to know that it's yellow from experience. And that black sheet tells told the printing plate where the lines and the dots were all to be cut. And then at some late stage, you actually see all the colors together, and you realize you've missed something. You've put something in the wrong. Somebody's got one white eye and one red eye or something. It's
and that's how the character was born.
Red eye.
It's also easy now on the computer that to decide that you weren't going to use the computer seems to me counterproductive. Why would you make it hard for yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. And I think it's very interesting to me that there's just this whole turn that we've taken on this conversation. This is exactly why I love talking to people like you, Eddie, and finding out about how these things actually come together in terms of the nuts and bolts of your actual process. And as we're talking about evolving from working in the garage on your black and white comics to working on a computer and your color work, in between all this, From Hell also evolves. In 2018, I have an article here I'm looking at from Slate. In October, actually, of 2018, almost exactly the same time that we're talking to you now, it was announced that From Hell was going to be re-released as a serial again, but this time that it would be in color. And at least according to this article, it's a furor. People don't know what to do. People are up in arms. It's very funny to be talking to you now and finding out that the only reason you did it was because it was cheap. But for lots of people, including myself, it was like part of the what made it so special was the fact that it was black and white. And when it was announced that it would be re-released in color, a lot of people, of course, purists, the comic book world is full of them. They couldn't believe it. What an outrage! What did you get any of that response? And what did you think of it?
What are you saying? It's like when Dylan went electric.
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly when Campbell went color. When From Hell went color, people blanched.
One or two people have said to me they preferred it as a noir thing. But I haven't just colored it. I've fixed a lot of things. And it's 600 pages. I mean, it looks like it's supposed to look, but there's so many. There's one place where a guy arrives home, and you see him outside. He's Aberline, the police detective. He's arriving home, and you see him on the black and white one. He's outside his door, and he's going in. So his wife's welcoming him home, and he goes in. Then we see it from inside the hallway, on the other side of the door, and I've got the hinges on the wrong side.
So you're able to fix things.
The hinges are on the right going in, but they're on the right on the other. They should have switched to the left because we're on the other side of the door. So I had to take that picture and flip it over. But little things like that have bugged me for 20 years now. You're going to tell me you never noticed.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever did notice that. I was
funny.
too busy. Go ahead, Brian.
I was just gonna say it's just funny how whenever you finish anything, there's always going to be a few things, and you tell yourself as a way to sort of move on psychologically, like I'm just too into this right now. And in 5 years, I won't even remember that I was concerned about that. And then now you're going on like 20 years later, it's like this still bugs the shit out of me. I can't stand it. Yeah. It makes I feel that.
So, but the new version of the story gave you a chance to make those fixes that you wanted to do all these years.
Yeah. There's loads of things. There's, in 600 pages, there's looking at do you not have the new one there?
I've got the new one on my end, but it's going to be hard for me just to hold it up and show it to you.
Yeah, we're looking at the old one. But,
what page? Can you see what page that was, Brian?
No.
Well, we'll talk about it in a second because we'll start talking about the new one in a second, and I can kind of give people an example.
Yeah.
I gave Netley a kind of carriage that I changed it halfway through, but on this one, I decided it should be a more modest carriage. I'd gone and given him a limousine. This one should be more modest. So I was able to retroactively give him the right carriage from the beginning.
Ah, okay.
Things like that. There's once or twice I just couldn't find this, but we were drawing this before Google. I don't even know. Before I had a computer, I didn't have a computer. I didn't have my first computer until 1995. I drew most of this before then, most of From Hell. I couldn't locate photographs for some of those buildings in Chapter 4 where Gull is doing the tour of London.
Oh, that's an incredible part of the book.
Yeah, now I was able to find. So I've replaced those panels with what they should have been in the first place.
Ah, wow.
Things like that. So it's not just colouring. I've not gone back and made it the book the way I would do it now. I've gone back and made it the way I should have done it 20, 25 years ago, if I'd been able to get all the information that I needed.
Right.
There's one or two other places where, Mary Kelly's room, I've made it look too spacious, too open. So I've gone in close. You can't just zoom in. You've got to move to make the perspective work. You've got to move the parts a little bit. I've done a little bit of that so that we're more in a claustrophobic little flat in London.
Right.
In Victorian times that had a low ceiling and hardly any room. Things like that. Things where I've looked at it and thought, I didn't quite get that right. I've fixed it now. I've got it right.
I think that's amazing. It's such a cool opportunity to be able to go back and, like you say, to say, this is what I was trying to do then, and now I can actually make it as good as possible. And just so people get an idea, when it comes to the colorization of the new version, you're using a very modest, if we can tell it all, I got to get my mic out of my way a little bit here, but if people can see this at all, it's a very modest use of color. There's a lot of black and white still going on here with just some, some shades and stuff, some browns, some reds, but it's not, overly colorified. What were your decisions regarding this sort of muted palette and everything that you did end up using for the color version?
There are one or two places where sudden blinding color does break in.
That's right. Yeah.
Like when we were suddenly, the spirit of Gull is in the sky over the Mediterranean. Suddenly it's blindingly ultramarine blue.
Right,
with, little things like that and then when he's looking into the sun. Oh, there's one place near the end where Alan wanted an effect of white on white. And which is, I'm not sure how you would do that with black ink. And I did my best with the black ink, but I was able to get a much better result of what Alan wanted there.
That's cool.
With the full palette of colors, an effect of white on white. Actually, I'm giving them way too much of the story here. But,
no, it's great. It's great.
As he imagines himself rising up among the pantheon of the gods.
I don't think you're giving away too much. I think you're making it sound. If people don't know what we're talking about, they're going to be fascinated.
A blinding white.
Yeah,
on white. White.
There's so many amazing sequences in the book, and in the story, and in your visualization of the story. How much you mentioning that Alan had ideas about this white on white. How much did you guys work together in terms of like what he wanted to see and what you thought it should look like? I mean, what was the collaboration?
We didn't really talk about it unless there was a problem, because as I said, I was living in Australia, and an international phone call back then seemed to be more expensive than it is now. People
have no idea what that's all about.
It's like air travel. Air travel hasn't become more expensive. Air travel has not. The price of air travel has not changed as much as the price of cookies. Proportionately.
Yeah, I do.
I can still go to another continent for less, for less than $2,000 and back, which is what I would have said in the 90s. I would have said, I'd go to America for $2,000 and back. It's about the same now. It wouldn't cost me any more now to do it. It's
kind of like a computer still costs really $2,000 or $3,000 if you're getting like a reasonable computer.
Yeah.
It's just
I remember,
in the 90s we would have thought they'd be $100 by now.
I remember my father-in-law. He was in Australia. I was the first one in his little town to get in a word processor. Cost him like Yeah, for the office. It's cost them like 25,000
Oh my
to
God.
install this word processor for the secretaries to use.
Boy, that was a hell of a time to be an early adopter of anything. You were really taking the plunge for everybody.
Yeah. Now everybody's got a computer in their pocket.
No doubt.
I know. I try to think about the stuff I was trying to use in the 90s was so terrible, and it's still way better than
all the girls have got a computer in their back pocket that's twice as powerful as the average desktop thing we had in the 90s. And way back when, everybody was concerned about the shape of their ass, you know. Nowadays, people just stick all their stuff in their back. All the girls have got all this stuff in their back pockets.
Yeah. And this is the travesty.
At first I thought they were carrying tins of tobacco, because back in the 70s, if you had a big square thing in your back pocket, it was a tin of tobacco. It was a tin of rolling tobacco. You know?
I know, they're all rolling their own, right?
Everybody's got this big rectangular thing in their back pockets.
It's so weird how
their jeans are all splitting in different places because of all the stuff in their back pockets, and everybody's quite happy with that.
It's
in the
interesting
1970s, girls would never put anything in their pockets for how the world has changed.
I know.
How we've advanced.
That's true.
Showing my age. Yeah.
Jordache. Remember Jordache? That was a thing.
I do. I remember that. I remember those Brooke Shields commercials when I was like 12. They were mesmerizing.
Yeah. Some very early ideas got cemented in your mind. Yeah.
I didn't even know what was going on, but I knew I liked those commercials.
Right. Wait a minute. That's the girl from Blue Lagoon. Yeah. No,
I've heard about that.
I do think it's interesting how like the mediums and the technology change, and certain things people will deeply resist, and other things people will just wreck. They're always good, and like changing the ripping apart your clothing or whatever, just so you can have this thing as an appendage on you now. I think it's interesting how like we'll let some things through the gate and completely take over our lives, and then other things, we duly resist. But in terms of like, again, like I think what's interesting for anyone in any medium, Eddie, is just thinking about how technology has informed what they've done over a long arc of time. And I think, again, like what you've done is really fascinating. I love the idea that you've sort of let go of that. You've not made it harder on yourself than it needed to be. And I do say that like not a lot of people can make that turn. I think that it's a weird, the 90s, and then if you made it through the 90s and got into the 2000s and we're already kind of up on things a little bit, I think it was really helpful because, I see a lot of people even now just turning really to technology to start doing more with whatever it is, their medium is. And I'm like, wow. On one hand, it's like they missed all the bad, terrible things of the last 25 years that never actually really worked.
Right.
And everything actually functions now. But I do find it interesting though that for those of us that if you look at generations and spans of time, I mean, we're going to be this one generation of humanity that folded right over into the information age, and the levels of adaptation and processing of information while trying to build creative ideas in a practice or to do whatever it is you're doing. It's a very unique situation right now.
I find a lot of the youngsters doing comics now are purists about certain things. Like in a book I did a few years ago called The Lovely Horrible Stuff, when my car, I had a blue car, but every time my wife and I are getting in the blue car, I've used a photo of the blue car. And what interested me was the incongruity of a cartoon figure getting in a photograph of a car every time. And also, all through that book, I won't go into the details of the book, but I used lots of tricks where I was interested in the contrasts of one kind of image mixed in with other kinds of image. But a lot of these youngsters now say to me, "Oh, that's cheating, Eddie. You should have drawn that. I didn't buy this book to see you taking a photo. You should have drawn." So I don't know. It's funny. There's a purist aesthetic about what you should and shouldn't do. While we're talking about color, I'm going to turn a light. Oh, can you see it?
Give us a tour.
Can you see?
It looks good.
To give the reader
Beautiful.
an example, that was a particularly abstract sequence of. Anyway, there's things like that that are just because you were putting it over there as something that was full of mundane and banal colors. I was just letting the reader know that there's a bit of coloristic excitement in this book. I noticed that I'm getting a bit grainy. I'm going to just nip over there and turn a light on here. Do you notice that? Because the light's gone from the window.
That's fine. I think I really think it's an interesting thing to think about, the way that technology impresses itself into our work. And I think we're all talking about this same time period that where we went into the computer age, basically, and the way that that's affected things. I was thinking about it just the other day in terms of how music works nowadays, and all the ways that digital technology has democratized music and made it easier to do and made it possible to do so much on your own. But at the same time, it's also like scrambled the business in such a way that it's lots of people can participate, but lots of people can't necessarily make a dime doing it. You know what I mean? So it's cut both ways in a way.
The important thing with music and art, see, music it's an oral skill, and art is a visual skill.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that we're not using the hands anymore. Even if you're not using actual instruments like a violin or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
To make a piece of music, you still need the oral skill. You still have to hear it in your mind's ear before you make the thing.
Mm-hmm.
In order to create good music, it doesn't happen accidentally. You have to, even if you're using tape loops and whatever, you still have to know what you're doing. You still have to be able to hear a thing before you can make that thing happen. It's not going to happen by accident.
Right.
And the same with especially in a 600-page comic, it's something like that's not going to happen accidentally. You have to bloody know what you're doing. and I think it's a kind of, I'm not sure I'd want to be starting now, because the market for the graphic novel is such that there's no market for little things. And a new writer artist has to create this huge book, is expected to by publishers to bring them their first book has got to be a 500-page thing, which is the poor artist, writer, cartoonist. He or she, because it's half and half these days. So many young ladies making great books, but they haven't a chance to, through trial and error, to work out what it is they're doing, like we used to have. Like even From Hell came out in an anthology way back at the beginning.
Right. Yeah.
It came out in parts, and then it came out in volumes. For 10 years it came out in little slim packages.
Right.
A chapter at a time before we put it all together. And even before I started, I've been working for 10 years putting out all kinds of stuff, short stories. There was a market for short stories or one-pagers and things, which there isn't anymore. A young person arriving now has got to go away and conceive a whole book, which I don't think is a great thing. I think that it'd be much better if there was a place where they could work things out first. Right.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, that to me, that makes total sense. That that it's a lot to ask of an artist to where's your Game of Thrones, and it's like, can I maybe I could start with an origin story that's 12 pages long. Yeah. So I think it makes sense. I mean, and especially too because to some degree, you're talking about learning story structures and things like that in terms of the authors of these things, and it's that's stuff you can work out on a small scale and then blow up, you know what I mean? Once you have a better understanding of it. But and it's a thing that, it's, if, the buying and selling of little things is not, it's a good place to learn, because if something's terrible, it's okay. Nobody invested a bunch in it. Nobody lost a bunch on it. It's all right. You can have a failed small thing, but if you have a failed big thing, now it's a problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Your whole career's riding on this thing. If your first 500-page book's a disaster, what do you do after that?
Yeah, exactly.
Also, it exponentially reduces the amount of just iterations and growth that can happen across the entire, business or genre or medium or whatever. Because if the barrier to entry is so high, and that's the only step that people are really afforded to then really fail on, then you're going to have exponentially less micro failures. They're going to get you to something like the whole growth of everything is slowed down hugely.
Yeah.
What about on the other side of things, Eddie? So we're talking about how technology has actually afforded you a way to do things easier than you used to be able to do them, and to be able to use the colors the way you would have wanted to in the beginning if you'd had the means. What about on the other side of things? Do you have any sort of, like, from your own point of view as a reader, or in terms of the readers out there who enjoy your works, do you have any sense of, like, whether people should be reading printed pages, or whether they should just read stuff on a digital tablet? Do you have any opinion about those things?
I've done one or two books where with the ebook versions were so, I don't know, unless they could actually just serve up a page that looked exactly like the pages I'd done it. I'm talking about illustrated books here. I'm thinking, why would anybody want this? I won't mention the name of the book, but why would anybody want this as an ebook if it looks like this? Mm-hmm. And I'm not even sure people care. I don't know. I meet so many people that they don't know how to look at it as a work of art. They just want to know who did what to whom. Mm-hmm. Even when I was a kid, I didn't really want to. I wasn't that interested in, whether Thor was stronger than the Hulk. I didn't care. I really wasn't interested. I was more interested in it whether Jack Kirby and Stan Lee were getting along. Whether they were happy. I mean, we're over there in New York. I want to know what their lives are like. Mm-hmm. And I'd pick up an issue just to see what they were doing. Oh, what was Jack doing this week? But since the whole of academia has got into comics, into reading comics and reading the graphic novel, the whole thing seems to have gone back to what characters are doing to each other. Mm-hmm. And they use that to then talk about postmodernism or something. Yeah. They use that to talk about philosophers, but they don't care about the artist anymore. They don't care about the writer or the artist. They use that to talk about other stuff. Mm-hmm. They use that to talk about late period capitalism or something, to break the breakdown of social transactions or whatever. I don't. I'm only seeing this thing from a distance.
The Green Goblin and the breakdown of the social contract.
But it seems to me they've gone all the way back to talking about whether Thor is more powerful than the Hulk. Uh-huh. It seems a reversal to me. They care too much about what's happening. Mm-hmm. They care too much about what's happening in the comic, I think.
Yeah, and not so much about, like you say, about the idea that the thing is a work of art, that can be observed as a work of art, know?
Yeah.
So, Eddie, as you know, we talk to a lot of, mixed martial artists, fighters, and coaches and people in the media around the sport. And it's a very interesting parallel there in the sense that we often find the people that sort of tend to either intellectualize these things or think about them perhaps from a more artistic point of view get frustrated with people that, you know, in the fight game that are just concerned with like, can the big guy beat the, you know, can the punch, you know, the guy that can strike really well, can he beat the guy that, you know, can wrestle really well? And just they hyper refine it to these sort of childlike polarities, you know, where it's like I don't know, and then can the American guy beat the Russian guy, or I don't know. They just put this stuff into these buckets so quickly, and so for those that are perhaps a little bit more you know, weird, or like, who cares, man? There's so much inside this that is so much more interesting, and you're not even allowing yourself that because you're entertaining these polarities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about that? I mean, do you think that some of that mentality, that some of that,
I'm just going to show off another colors.
Yeah, please do.
This is what I was talking earlier where I was talking about the, you know, we'll suddenly switch to very vivid colors.
Mm-hmm.
Just as an example of what I was talking about. What were you saying?
I was just going to say that, do you think that, to what degree does that, you know, that Hulk Thor sort of mentality, that seems to be part of the mentality that maybe is behind like the superhero movie culture, you know what I mean? And the fact that those things have become, and when I like many of the superhero movies, and not really like a, you know, snobby about that kind of thing, but I mean, it is such a huge phenomenon, and it's an interesting thing to think about comics being thought of as a kid's thing, then comics being taken very seriously as an adult form of literature, essentially, which is what part of the legacy of what From Hell was able to do. And now it's turned into mass entertainment for everyone.
Yeah, I think it's quite good. That whole Marvel cinematic universe.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was quite cleverly done, but I always liked the bits where they weren't saving the universe. Remember 5 years has passed and they have to go and find Bruce Banner, and he's become this Professor Hulk. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
I'd see more of that. Forget all this universe saving shit. I can't be bothered with that.
Yeah.
Or what Iron Man's worried. Maybe he can invent a way to go back in time, but what if he changed the past and he no longer had his daughter? I thought that was a great moment. I thought we should see more of that.
Uh-huh.
I thought it was great. And I thought it was funny that Martin Scorsese got involved in an argument there where he was saying that all of this stuff, there's no cinema anymore. Cinema's broken. So I can't remember what the exact words were. Cinema ain't what it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of I think it's, you know, I think there's always going to be people who feel that. I mean, there's so many angles to it. I think there's people who will never take, you know, comic books seriously as, you know, as a high cultural art form. I think there's also people who, you know, are, you know, fanatics for comics, who are, you know, they've got that purist attitude about the book they read when they were 12 and they want it to be like that. But the movie's kind of being made for kids nowadays. You know what I mean? There's all these different vying, you know, sort of things. And it's like, just enjoy them. I mean, like you said, those Marvel movies to me were a great mix of, most of them are a great mix of action and thoughtful characters and good writing and good filmmaking. I mean, many of them are quite good.
Yeah. Where I come from, we'd say to Scorsese, I'll stop being a silly bollocks.
Yeah, that's probably the right response to that.
Yeah, I do think that you know, for you, Eddie, you know, it's something where when you have you've done the autobiographical work, you've done a lot, you know, you've looked at, you've been in other worlds, and you've reflected your own. In terms
well
of
said, Ryan.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, I'm telling you, that's my favorite effing thing, is when a writer says, "Hey, that's a good line." I'm like, "Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm leaving the room. I'm leaving on a high note. I'm out." I mean, it takes a lot of me wandering to get to those things, so I appreciate your patient. But no, but I guess I was curious, Eddie, about like your formative years, because, you know, we tend to attach a lot of, it's a strange amalgam of as Hakim Bey would say, Joe. He would say it's an amalgam of prosthesis and sentimentality, where it's just like there's something about your formative years where on one hand, what you were impressed most by that informs most of maybe what your trajectory was. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes you look back on it and you're like, God, that was really cheesy, or I don't know what I was thinking. But I guess I was curious. Some work holds up, right? Some stuff doesn't. But what were you most formed by?
And as you get older, there's more of that,
Yeah.
You try to go to sleep at night. You remember every stupid, embarrassing thing you ever did.
Yeah, it sucks that the catalog of memories is only getting broader, which means we have that much more to source of dumbass things that we did or said, or works or points of view that we proudly stood behind that were clearly whatever. Yeah, it's a problem getting older because you just have a greater collection of problems.
And as people, as you get older, people are dying. As people die, I think, I can stop worrying about that time I upset them.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's true.
I can stop letting that one keep me awake at night.
My funny thing that I'm running into right now with a lot of my sort of colleagues and friends that are, we're all in the sort of late 40s, early 50s, maybe early 40s to early 50s, but we're all like, everybody's like refreshing their camera gear or getting new studio monitors or various pieces of equipment. And the decision making for things, like if you're buying something now, if it's of consequence, a house or whatever, it's just funny that your consumer decisions immediately become like, well, this is probably going to be the last one of these things that I'm going to need. Like, these are my forever speakers, or like these, you digest your own mortality in these little doses of like acquisition of resources. You're like, that's the last one I'll need. So, all right.
You open your shirt drawer in the morning and you think, are these T-shirts going to see me to the end? Am I going to get... How many new ones will I need to get?
Oh my God! What was that Oliver Wendell Holmes? Wasn't it? He had the poem about something about the breeches. Like he made a poem about his favorite pair of jeans that were, falling apart, and it was this whole sort of mortality play, But it was also really festive and fun. But I just remember he keeps talking about his something about he rhymed in some way his earthly stitches with his dungarees in some way that I will always remember. But yeah, pair of jeans is the same thing. You're like, damn, I really like these are my jeans. Like you don't just get jeans. Like jeans find you. This is a whole thing. Or maybe Eddie, I'm just wrong, and what I'm not realizing is that in 10 years I won't be wearing jeans anymore. Maybe you just let the jeans thing go.
Well.
Yeah.
He's a yeah.
Yeah. Your knees won't bend so well in jeans that I'm gonna have those baggy trousers that old cops.
Just enough to get up the golf cart.
Your trousers will start getting. They won't be. They'll start to getting too baggy at the bottom. You have to start. What's a John Betjeman line in a John Betjeman poem? I grow old, or is it T.S. Eliot? I can't remember. I grow old. I wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. I think it's T.S. Eliot.
That's good.
Like the moment your vanity gives up on custom tailored clothing, it's just survival now.
Let's just roll them up. I'm good.
Oh man! All right, so we should probably get this wrapped up here. But Eddie, I would love to give you an opportunity to say anything or bring up anything that you feel of import or anything that you think that people might especially want to know about and their pathway to your latest.
Nope, I've got nothing more to say.
Well, then I'll just put this on the screen. How about that?
Oh, wait. We went...
yeah.
I put the ladies on the cover this time.
Oh,
well done.
we thought it was high time we put the... I always avoided doing sensational covers. At the very beginning, I made a rule that we just have still life on the covers. So the very first volume had a top hat with grapes.
Mhm.
And there was another one had a candle with a cell phone, but all of them were still lives. I wanted to avoid sensationalism at all costs, and still, so finally we put the ladies on the cover. Pleased about that.
Yeah, it looks great. I mean, it's a great looking book. It's a really nice volume. To me, as someone again who's been a huge fan of From Hell since it came out, I really do love this new book as well. I really kind of think you need both of those. There's actually a book also called, I think I'm not going to be able to. I think it's called The From Hell Companion. Are you familiar with that book?
Oh yes, what I wrote.
Oh, do you wrote that? Yeah. That's why it's in my notes.
It's well, when I say I wrote it, it almost amounts to a retelling of From Hell, but using ancillary materials. Like I used large samples of Alan Moore's scripts, scans of Alan Moore's notebooks where he's done little thumbnail drawings, and different things, documents that he'd written, or interviews that he'd made, using. And I've introduced each section with a little essay of my own about why I'm putting these things together. So yeah, the From Hell Companion.
Yeah, I think it's.
So if you've read From Hell and you're looking for deeper thoughts, a deeper dive into it, the From Hell Companion. Yeah, it's not just a lightweight book with photos of the author and pictures of
No.
photographs of from the period or whatever. It's another think. It's a thinking man's revision of the material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. I think, and thanks for correcting me. I was sitting here with my Eddie Campbell notes, and I'm like, "Oh, have you heard of this book?" But it's true, and I think, I mean, I'm bringing it up because to me, I feel like if you're new to From Hell and you've never read From Hell before, I would say get the companion too, and like sort of read them together, because I found the companion to be like, I mean, it was like, I was so taken by From Hell, and it's such a dense, like you keep saying, I mean, it's a big book, but it's a dense book too. There's a lot going on, and especially for Americans, there's a whole bunch going on regarding, English history and slang and all sorts of things, that it's really helpful to have the companion, because you really illuminate it and really sort of bring all these details to life in a way that I think, I would have missed a lot of things about how, a lot of why I think that book is so amazing is because of just how broad it goes, and then how it pulls it all together. It's just this whole deep, complex universe. And I really feel like the companion helps the understanding of all that.
From Hell 2 is the first. I think it's the first comic that's got end notes. There's
Right. Yeah.
50 pages of Alan's end notes.
Yeah, I was flipping back and forth during the whole time I was reading that, because there's so much going on with the end notes. But yeah, between the end notes and the companion, I think you really kind of need all that to get to understand just how really, really marvelous the book is.
Yeah. I think that there's also another way, Joe, which is to just not know what the hell's going on and just plow through it anyway, and let yourself
That's true too. Let
yourself have this kind of tangential, weird, like sometimes I understand, sometimes I'm just perceiving things. I've definitely seen many accounts of people that never leveraged or utilized the end notes and just like went through it and then realized 20 years later that they really should actually understand the book.
It's a great
profound experience to have. Yeah.
It's a great piece of storytelling. It's mine, but it's I did my best to illustrate.
Thumbs up from Eddie Campbell.
Great piece of storytelling. And as I said, with the new edition, I've gone back to fine tune some of the places where I thought I failed to do the best with it. But we kept all the clutter out of the way. There are sequences with no words in them. All the clutter, all the words, all the why did we make this interpretation of the facts and so on, all that is in the notes. But just to read it, you can glide through whole sequences where things are happening quite quickly.
Like little, it's almost like the airport moving sidewalks. There's
well, I got to tell you again. I think it's actually good timing that it took us a minute to get you scheduled for the show, that we had to delay it for a week because of our technical problems. I think I'm sitting here on a very sort of spooky, rainy fall day in Nashville, and I think it's a great time of year for somebody who's brand new to this story. It's get that book right now, get the new master edition, enjoy these beautiful colors, and read a scary book about, we're now in this whole true crime era that everybody's so interested in. There's no better true crime story than the Jack the Ripper story, and especially this version of it.
Yeah. Also, the color one doesn't cost that much more than the...
yeah, exactly. It's a bargain.
It doesn't cost that much more than the black and white one, which I think I can't remember. Is it 40? I never noticed things like that.
Send a check payable to you, or how does that work?
When I order a book off the internet, when you order a book on Amazon, there's a little, when it gives you the data on the book, it tells you how heavy it is. Now, when I talked to a pal of mine, I said, "Well, I've just ordered a new book. It's 15 pounds in weight."
In weight, yeah, exactly. This book isn't quite 15 pounds, but it's definitely, you're getting your money's worth in terms of actual volume. That's for sure.
Still heavy, man.
Yeah, it's heavy on every level. It's a heavy book to drag around. It's a heavy book to process. But in the best possible way. It's really fantastic. And Eddie, I can't thank you enough, not only for your great work on this great book that, it's definitely been something that's improved my life in terms of like being able to enjoy a great story that's like beautiful to look at. But also I want to thank you again for being so patient with us and for coming back a week later and just trusting the fact that we actually could make this thing happen. And you've been nothing but, again, a gentleman throughout all this. And I really appreciate your patience and you're taking the time to be with us this week on the Art Fight podcast.
Well, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Brian. Can you still see me? I've gone.
Yeah, we can see you.
We can make you full screen even.
No, I've frozen. I've frozen again. I think
okay.
When I put the book back on the table, suddenly everything froze.
Hey, go ahead, Eddie.
How we can do these extraordinarily complicated things with a little device that fits in your briefcase. I'm doing all of this with a laptop here.
Yeah, me too.
I do everything on this tiny laptop. I design books on this tiny laptop. It's amazing that you can carry around the world with you in your briefcase.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when you bought a new computer, you had to take the car and load it in with things sticking out the windows, because you always had to buy a bit of shelving to carry it, you had to buy a compartment for it to sit on. You get.
I think.
Did we lose him for real?
Yeah, I think we lost him.
Okay. Well, should we see if he pops back in?
Well, I think that we need to wrap it up, but we'll finalize with him, and we'll make sure that in the show notes everybody gets all the information that they need. But there's the website. Yeah,
there's Eddie's website.
Oh, there's Eddie again. Oh, he's back.
I cut out there.
We were just selling the book for you.
I was just saying how good the equipment was, and then it cut out. Isn't it marvelous?
It's incredible what we can do.
It's like people are up in the sky, 30,000 feet up, and they're complaining that the Wi-Fi doesn't work.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
You can phone somebody from the sky. You're complaining.
Yeah, it's crazy.
The sound just cuts out.
Well, so we're gonna go ahead and do the send off now. Eddie, hang on for 1 second. We'll give you a little. We're gonna take 2 more minutes of your time after we turn the live lights,
the live feed off.
But anyway, thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for listening and watching.
Thanks, Joe.
And
thanks everybody for listening. We'll be back next week. Thanks again, Eddie.